Hi, this is Greg Anderson, and this is the Living in Carver County podcast. It's an insider's conversation with the people who make Carver County the best place to live, work, and raise a family. Now, there's some big things coming up this fall, and so I'm excited to have my guest today, David Brecht, who's the Director of Finance and Operations for District 112. David, thanks for agreeing to talk to me, and we got a bunch of stuff to unpack, but before we get rolling, maybe if you could share a little bit about you personally. Where did you grow up? Where did you go to school? How is it that you ended up to be in the position that you're at with District 112?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the invite, Craig. So happy to be here. And thanks for the opportunity to maybe answer some questions around Eastern Carver County Schools. For myself, I'm a Minnesota native, grew up out in Hutchinson, Minnesota. Some of my family still lives there, attended the University of Minnesota, went to grad school at Mankato, and have been in education all of my career so far. Started as a high school counselor in another school district, had the opportunity to come to Eastern Carver County Schools as the assistant principal at Chaska High School. And since then have been stayed in Chaska or in Eastern Carver County Schools now for 20 years. Have been in roles as an assistant principal, as a principal. Along the way, acquired my superintendent license in addition to that, and then came over to the district office about 8 years ago in a student services role. And then along the way, started learning about the world of finances, attending our professional organization in the state of Minnesota, Minnesota Association of School Business Officials, getting a certification from that, spending time with previous directors of finance, and find myself now in this role for the last year and a half, and am really enjoying it. When I came to Eastern Carver County Schools, moved the family down here, and we live in Carver and have happily lived there for 20 years now. Have raised three children in the school district. Two have graduated. One is out of college and married. One is finishing her senior year, and the other is a high school senior at Chaska yet. So happy to live here in Eastern Carver County Schools, serve in the role as an educator in a few different capacities in Eastern Carver County Schools, and just excited to be here today to talk a little bit about what's out in front of us and help answer some questions or maybe share some information that people might find helpful as we move forward. So,
All right. Well, I'm glad that you're all in.
thanks, Chris.
And it's nice to have at least one off payroll, right?
Married, you've got all your own stuff.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I love you and have a great adulthood.
Happy to help, but you got your own stuff now. Yes,
Yeah,
love it.
exactly. Well, good for you. That's nice. And it's kind of a nice spread. So you get to enjoy these different seasons. So let's talk a little bit about the referendum. I mean, it's hard, obviously, without a newspaper right now. And unfortunately, where a lot of people are getting their information is, on social media. And sometimes the stuff is accurate. Most of the time, I've found it's probably not great to get too far down into the comment section on any particular thing. So you just talk briefly about maybe the why. What's the pressing need that's pushing a referendum in this year?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So I think for context for me, as I've been in education for a while now, and now in my role in finance, something makes a little bit more sense to me now with a little bit of time to understand education finance in the state of Minnesota. And one of the fundamental pieces that I've learned is that, in my observation, funding from the state has struggled to keep up with inflationary pressures for education over time. So there's a graph we show from Ellers. They're a financial advisor. They serve school districts across the state of Minnesota. And the graph goes back to 2003, the school year 2003, and then it moves forward through 2024, I believe. And what the graph does is it shows a line. One of the core funding sources for education, public education in Minnesota, is the basic funding formula. It comes from the state of Minnesota, and it's a certain number times the number of students that are served in a district. So let's say that's $7,000. Well, that's the funding formula by the number of students, and that brings the majority of revenue, not all of the revenue, but a majority of the revenue into school districts. That base formula has increased over time. Every biennium, the legislature works on its increase to the funding formula. So what Ellers has shown is that that funding formula has increased over time, but it simply hasn't kept up even with the pace of inflation. So if that dollar, let's say that was $5,500 in 2003, had kept up with the pace of inflation, the dollar amount that we would receive now on that basic funding formula would be, I think it's about $1,100 or $1,200 more per pupil than it actually is. So
Okay.
we've simply fallen behind keeping up with inflation. And when I talk inflation, here's one of the examples that I like to use. If you as a homeowner have seen your homeowner's insurance go up, that's just one of those inflationary issues. Part of the good thing is maybe your home value has gone up, and we also know that insurance companies have struggled a little bit so that they have to increase premiums, right? So as
Hmm.
a school district, we're insuring a lot of buildings and a lot of acres, and the value of that property has gone up, and then the insurance premium has gone up to the amount of about 15% each of the last 2 years. Well, if we're getting an increase in our revenue from the state of Minnesota at 2.34% or 2%, it's hard for the revenue to keep up with some of the inflationary pressures that we see as a school district. What happens then is we have a gap between our real expenses and the revenue that's coming in. And the way I like to talk about that with people is when I encounter that as a homeowner or as a family or now in this role in finance, I see two primary ways to resolve that. We either need more revenue or we need to decrease our expenses. So on the right, on that latter side, we engage in cost containment. That
Hmm.
means fewer programs, fewer services, fewer people because we're a heavy people industry and education. Or we can look for ways to increase revenue. And the school district doesn't have a lot of ways to do that internally, right? We collect some athletic fees and some parking fees and some gate fees at games. That doesn't really help our budget that much. But one of the ways the state of Minnesota does allow a school district to try to increase revenue is go to the voters and present a question that is an operating referendum. So those dollars, if approved, would then come into the general fund for the school district to help us to be able to pay for things, salary, benefits, more teachers, class sizes, programs that we could offer. So that's really what a referendum question is about. It's going to the local community and trying to help them understand education finance, why we are in the situation that we're in, and seeing if they would step in to be able to support excellence in our schools by providing additional local dollars where the state has maybe fallen behind.
Okay. And that differs from other types of what other types of referendums are besides general operations?
Yeah, so the two other primary types are a bonding referendum. So in our school district, I've been here for 20 years, we've built additional buildings. Carver Elementary School is a new building. So we have gone out to voters to bond to build a building because the enrollment in the school district is increasing and we need more facilities. There is
So
another
Chan
type,
High School, for example, is
and
another,
Chan High School was built exactly, right?
and that
So
was
then
and that was a broader ballot initiative, there was a survey about that before that bonding thing to just kind of take a temperature. If I recall, there was a ballot. It was a question on a ballot before then the bonding happened as a secondary approach, or were those combined? It's been a while, so
yeah, usually if it's on a ballot, it's a question then for some type of financial support, either for bonding or for operating, right?
okay.
We do sometimes do surveys of the community, typically an outside group called Morris Leatherman, and they do phone surveys to gather feedback from our community. Now, when we were going into the question around Chanhassen High School, school districts have choices. Do you want to become one really large high school district, like many of the high schools in the western
Shakopee,
suburbs have been,
Prairie, Minnetonka, right?
Shakopee,
Yeah.
Prairie, Minnetonka, Wayzata, or do you want to have multiple high schools? What is the big question in there? In my opinion, it is about opportunities and experiences for students.
Right.
So if I have,
Absolutely.
yeah, if I have two 2000 high school, two 2000 student high schools, I have two football teams and two one-act plays and two marching bands and two activities and robotics clubs and speech and debate, basketball. If I have one 4,000 student high school, I have one of all of those things. And in my mind, then the number of students that get to participate are fewer.
Sure.
So I believe our community stepped in and supported the two high school version, believing that that creates better and more experiences for students in their preparation to be successful in life, right?
Yeah.
Because now we can get engaged in with, I like to say 4 A's. In addition to academics, there's arts, activities, and athletics. And when we have more two high schools, we have more opportunities for students to find spaces, to find connections, to feel engaged, and to build out all of those other skills that might need to be successful.
Mhm.
It takes more money, more operating dollars to operate two high schools than it does one high school.
Right.
So that's one of the reasons then the local community is asked to lean in to support that decision and those experiences and those opportunities for students.
Yep. I tell people in my day job, that it's not a right or it's about fit, right? It
Yep, yep,
fit doesn't imply right or wrong. You walk into
yep,
Fleet, you try on some gloves, they don't fit, doesn't make you
yep,
wrong, doesn't make the gloves wrong. But some of the school district you mentioned, just as an example for basketball, if your kid's not at least a Division II prospect, um,
right,
probably not going to even be on the team, or
right,
get to play. And the
right.
idea I think collectively as a community that we leaned into at the time was kids should be able to maybe do two of the A's, right? Be in athletics in the fall, but also be in the band or be in a play or be able to participate in DECA or robotics or something like that without having to
Exactly.
be as opposed to like an athletic farm club, like
Yep.
a
Well,
minor league team. And so I think collectively across the board. So I think that's an important place to start because the high schools is pretty significant. I mean, that I have to imagine, and I've not seen the breakdown on this, but I have to imagine that's probably the most expensive building that you have in terms of just based on the scale of the activities around that. You're not buying football pads, for example, for flag football. You're have uniforms for the marching band and all of those things that go around with that. So starting off operationally for a district our size, two high schools it's a pretty big lift, is it
yes,
not?
you are. Yep, you are exactly right, and that is part of I believe a choice that we made, and there are operational expenses and realities that come along with that. So to your point, we have two football programs, great for participation. That means we have two sets of coaching staff, we have two sets of uniforms, and you take that and multiply that out
Stadiums,
by
practice fields,
all the fields,
transportation
the
costs, right?
facilities, the transportation, and then multiply that out by all of the different programs, the basketballs and the one-act plays and the theaters and the lighting. Do I think that creates opportunities for students? Absolutely. Do I think opportunities create more well-rounded students who have better experiences, who have the opportunity to be more successful later in life? Absolutely. And we know that comes at a cost with the people and the facilities and the supplies and resources to make those things happen.
Yep. Because it wasn't just the whatever it was at the time, $95 million to build the building. It's then the
Right.
ongoing operational aspect. Okay. So I'm sorry, we interrupted. So we talked about the operational, the general fund.
Operating.
Yeah, the
Yep.
operating levy and then the bonding levy. You mentioned there were three. What was the third one?
And the other one is capital projects. So the district also has been supported by the community in a capital projects levy. In our district, we often call it our technology, safety, and security levy. So we are in, I believe, year 6 of that. So it was approved in 2019. And those dollars have been leveraged to initially, in the early years, we did a lot of development out into the vestibules and entries of all of our buildings, adding security systems, adding locking doors, adding badges, adding vestibules for visitors to come into before they could gain access to the school, increasing and improving our security and our surveillance systems, and also maybe, and maybe sometimes people don't think about it, but really we almost have a one-to-one initiative for every student in the school district with a device, right? So that helped us when we went into COVID and students were learning from home and they still have online devices. Well, we have to pay for that somehow. If we didn't have a capital projects levy that helped us with some of this construction or some of the security cameras or some of the devices, we'd be taking that out of our general fund, and then we wouldn't have those general fund dollars for other things, right? So oftentimes it's about trade-offs. And when you have more dollars, you can do more things to provide more services, more supports, more programs, more opportunities for students. So operating is one type, or bonding, buildings. Bonds are for buildings. Levies are for learning. And then the capital projects is for technology, safety, and security in our districts.
Okay, so on the capital projects, you mentioned we're in year 6. How many years is left on that?
Yeah, so any of the referenda that we go out for are limited to a maximum of 10 years. So anything that we've done previously has a 10-year lifespan on it. So if we're in year 6, and I believe that's correct on the capital projects, we'd have
Yeah,
4
well,
left,
plus or minus one a year,
plus or
but
minus 1.
yeah,
And
okay.
then so sometimes people are like, well, it feels like the school district is coming out all the time to ask for more money, right?
Hmm.
So if we did a
I was
capital
going to ask
project,
that.
yeah, we did capital projects in 2019.
Okay.
And then at the same time, we had asked for an operating and it did not pass. So we came back out in 2021 and asked for operating. Um, and then there's bonding. So if your district is growing, you might have to go out and ask for bonding because there's a need for a new building.
Hmm.
And then capital projects comes along. Well, you might approve it, and then 9 years later, it might be a renewal. And if there's been an operating levy referendum along the way, that might be on a different time frame. So we have previously approved operating referendums in the amount of $550, I think like $150 and $800.
Okay, I'm
So
going to stop you right there. So when you say that, what does that mean? 150, 500, that means what, per student per year or how?
per per student per year,
Okay,
yes.
all right. Just want to be clear on that because there's a
Yep,
lot
that's a
of
good
numbers, and if
clarification.
people are listening to this while they're walking, it might be hard to kind of keep that straight. So thank you. I
Yep,
didn't mean to interrupt, but go ahead.
nope, that's perfect. And they've been the school district had asked the community for that support at different times. So I think again, what has happened, I'm going to go back to something we started with. I think funding from the state has failed to keep up with inflationary pressures and costs. So then the school district faces this reality. Either we need to cost contain, reduce our budgets, and when we do that, we know it's likely people, programs, services, we have to increase class sizes, there's fewer things that we can do, and juxtapose that against the idea about 2 buildings and creating we don't want to lose opportunities. We don't want to pull back on programs and services. So if we don't want to have to cost contain and reduce that, then we say, community, would you support us with some operating dollars? And in the past, we've taken that little step, $150 one time, and then we face cost containment again. Then it's $550, and then we face cost containment again. So at different points in time, we've asked for different support from the community. And in the state of Minnesota, at some point, there is a cap. So school districts cannot ask for more than a total of about $2,300 in operating dollars from their local community. And some districts have been at that cap for quite some time. Some districts have less. And our new ask is to get us to the cap. So with the other referenda that we have, this new ask of $742 would get us to the cap that's allowable in the state of Minnesota currently, and that's guided by statute.
Okay. So going back to the state not keeping pace with inflationary things, is that just a function of budgeting from the state standpoint where they kind of borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, or was there a formula that's just antiquated based on how accelerated these costs have become? Because you mentioned inflation, but the reality is like insurance is like way exceeding it. You used insurance as an example on the dwellings, and that's
Yep.
far exceeded the inflationary rate. And
Right.
so is there just those wild cards in terms of, from a cost standpoint, or is there a lack? And I'm asking you to maybe editorialize on something you maybe don't want to do, but for your personal opinion, why do you think they have done a good job of keeping pace, particularly when a few years ago we had this significant surplus?
Yeah. Um, Another great question. And a few years ago, when we had a surplus, the talk in the newspapers and the media was about um, best ever funding for education, right? So there was some conversation, and appreciatively, the legislature did provide more funding, I think more funding in that biennium for education than they had at any other time historically. What also came along with that, and I haven't mentioned yet really at all, is mandates. So with that funding came a mandate for summer unemployment. So previously, school district employees who worked 9 months did not qualify for unemployment. I believe the assumption was you take a school-based job and you know you're not going to work in the summer. And maybe some people see that as a benefit. And
Hmm.
there wasn't unemployment that went along with that. And then in the 23 legislative session, there was advocacy for that, and they approved summer unemployment for some of our teams who are not employed in the summer, nutrition services or bus drivers or paraprofessionals.
Custodial or yeah.
Yep. And then there's a cost associated with that. Well, was the reimbursement to the districts enough to compensate us for the cost of that and or other mandates? And I would offer that the answer is no. So there's mandates that the legislature might ask school districts to implement. And sometimes they provide some money, and sometimes they don't provide enough money, and other times they don't provide any money. They just ask us to do things. So that, in addition to inflation, creates this issue that we face. Now, I'm not a legislator, but I can understand this. As I've worked on the school's budget this past year, and I saw what was coming up after this windfall or the great budgetary situation that the state had been in, it looks like now that the state is looking at its next biennium and it's a deficit moving forward. So I can imagine sitting as a legislator trying to understand the needs of constituents. And maybe that's health and human services, and that's transportation, and that's education. And I look at the state budget and say, and it looks like we have a shortfall. So we're not going to be able to meet all of the needs. Here's the best we can do financially. And I believe our politicians are doing the best they can trying to negotiate, and they don't want to ask for more taxes, and then they can't meet all the needs. So then what I do think happens, Greg, is they have given authority to the school districts to then go out to the local community and say, if the state isn't able to provide more, or in my opinion, enough to meet the needs, then we go out to the local community. And in a sense, they've created these authorities for school districts to go to the local community to get money instead of it coming directly from the state of Minnesota. And I think that has to do with collecting taxes, paying taxes. People think there's too many taxes, being a politician, and all the stuff that goes along with it, right?
Right.
It's a hard spot to be in when there are more needs than there ever is resources to provide for those needs. So
Yeah, I know there's frustration at the county level for
yeah,
the unfunded mandates, that come into place. The other question I had, and this is maybe hopefully not too off topic, but you mentioned with the unemployment thing for the seasonal workers, that becomes part of the overall compensation. I had an employee who wanted to go to a 4-day work week, but didn't want any reduction in salary. And so
sure.
when I talked to some people in HR, they said, okay, you have to be really careful with that because if that doesn't work and you go back to 5 days, then that salary then gets prorated out
Oh,
as a 25%, 20% add, which increases the
increase.
salary. So the calculation was done on an hourly basis. So you have to be really careful about that because the state tends to frown on, they're okay if you keep the salary and they cut the hours, but then if you bring the hours back, then the salary has to step up with that. In the
Sure.
course of the state did they have an inadvertent issue with respect to salaries for the other employees who are not eligible for unemployment because of this additional benefit that did that I don't if I'm not asking the question correctly, but do you kind of get where I'm going with that? Did that create any potential other issues with respect to salary for the people not eligible for unemployment?
Yeah, a good question. If I'm understanding it correctly, did it create an implication for others who didn't now get that benefit? And I'll be honest in saying I don't think like teachers didn't qualify for summer unemployment where other groups did.
Okay.
I haven't heard the teachers or the teachers group lobbying for or asking for summer unemployment, right? So I don't know, or I haven't seen or heard specific asks or talk about it being unfair that one group got it and another group didn't get it. So
Okay.
I
All right.
don't think it has created an additional implication other than paying for the summer unemployment of the groups that do qualify for
Right.
it.
Which wasn't accommodated from any kind of additional compensation from the state to the districts. It was just,
Some, yes.
oh, okay.
And here's what happens sometimes is the state will create a new mandate, and in that biennium, they will say, and here are the dollars to cover for what we anticipate the expenses to be. Now, maybe they underestimate the expenses and then it gets prorated. So there's more expenses and then they reduce everybody's portion to 92% or something like that. And then sometimes they don't have a long-term solution. They appropriated the budget for 2 years, but then the next 2 years comes along and they have to reappropriate the dollars to cover it again the next 2 years. Or my worry is the state now faces a budget shortfall. And what if they don't support the dollars needed for the unemployment, and then the school district still has to pay it without getting some revenue to offset that expense? So
And
I
you can't
think
take it
about,
back either.
and we can't take it back. So I have to think about those things as we build out a budget and worry about, well, what if this revenue didn't come in, but I still have the expense? Or what if insurance goes up more than expected because there's a crisis in
Or a hailstorm in
weather
Mankato.
storms,
Yeah.
and yes, all of those things become part of budgeting out and thinking about those unanticipated items that we still have to be able to cover and make sure we've got enough money to do that.
Okay. All right. Wow. Well, that's nice and simple, right? So,
That's exactly it. That's what makes it so fun.
yeah. All right. So we covered a lot of ground here. You really took it and ran. Let's talk about some of the presuppositions in terms of what this is actually going to cost from a standpoint and how when there's numbers that are they say what the impact is. I think it's what on an average house it's 20 something dollars per month, something like that.
Yep, yep.
So how talk a little bit about that calculation because I think some people you think of it literal that as a literal cost or just talk about what's the framework that the district is required to work within when it's doing its projections in terms of impact on the taxpayer.
Yeah. Again, that's another great question, and it really gets to I live in the district, and I'm a homeowner, and I get my property taxes, and if I go down to the bottom, I see my city and my county and my school district, right? And in that school district portion is those three types of funding sources, those requests that we talked about before. The capital projects levy is in there. We're still paying off some of the new schools that have been built in Eastern Carver County Schools, including Chanhassen High School, Victoria Elementary School, Carver Elementary School, in addition to Clover Ridge. So that's part of it. And then previous referendums are already in there, right? So let's talk about the new referendum, and I'm just going to use rounding some numbers to make it a little
Sure.
simpler, right? So let's say the ask was for $700 per pupil per year, right?
Okay.
You clarified that. And there are 10,000 students in the school district. That would be $7 million. And that would be 7 million, as long as it's 10,000 students every year, it's $7 million every year for 10 years. Now we know enrollment might go up, enrollment might go down, but that's really what it is. It's $700 per student. That's what the district is going to collect in taxes. So then the county has to figure out, well, what does that mean for Greg Anderson? What does that mean for David Brecht as a taxpayer? So they look at the property values of all of the entities within Eastern Carver County Schools, and they figure out your portion of it and my portion of it so that the district can collect $7 million, right? And what we know in our school district over time is we are still a growing district in terms of development, residential development, a little bit of commercial development is going on. So for the next 10 years, when the referendum is, I'll say when, if the referendum is approved, $7 million gets divided out over that entire tax base, and you are a property owner within that. Well, if we have more properties come online that add to the tax base, it means that those dollars, the 7 million, gets divided out over more people, over more properties, over more property value. And it means you likely end up paying less than you did the first year, as long as the school, as long as the residents in the district or the property base continues to increase. So that's one of the things that we talked about.
And the student, yeah, all right. Because
right.
as long but the tax amount. So what happens when, like COVID, for example,
Yes.
and people started homeschooling and or going to private schools. What
Yeah.
happens to those dollars then? How does that impact the district?
Right. So let's say instead of 10,000 students, there's 9,000 students, and it was $700 per student. So instead of $7 million, it's now 9 times 7 or 6 million, $6.3 million. That 6.3 million still gets divided across the entire tax base. So the variables are the tax base, and the tax base could go
The
up. It could
population going up.
yeah,
Yeah,
it
it's
could go
unlikely it's going to go
down.
down, right?
Yeah, but in our district, that hasn't happened, right?
Right.
And then the student number, the enrollment could go up, it could go down. So if the tax base stayed flat and the student numbers really increased, then an individual property owner might see their taxes increase. We don't believe in our history or what we know with our cities that that is going to happen,
Well,
that our enrollment will increase faster than the growth and development of our district and the tax base.
right.
So then
In order for
typically
that to happen, Lennar would have to fold up shop and move out of
all of that.
town. MI
Yep.
would move out of town. DR Horton would move out of town. Pulte would move out of town, and everything would
Yes.
just cease. Right. I
C's.
mean,
Yes.
that's the what would have to happen in order for that scenario to play out.
That's right.
Okay.
And student
So,
enrollment would still have to go
and
up,
yeah, exactly. And then more
which is
people
likely not going to
that were
happen.
homeschooling would say, well, I think we're going to send them back to public school.
Right.
So,
Right.
so that scenario is highly unlikely.
Highly unlikely. And
Okay.
I just, to be transparent and truthful, that it is a possibility. We just believe in our district, given the residential development and slow and steady growth in the number of students, that residential development and or tax base is going to grow faster than the number of students, and that's going to spread out your portion of it to make it smaller over time.
Right.
And what is that amount then? So we use Ellers as a financial advisor. They help us look at tax information in the school district. So we've identified an approximate median or mean. I don't remember which one exactly. Home value in our district is $500,000. And then in order for the district to collect those dollars that we're talking about, $742 per student with an estimated number of students, it would cost a homeowner who has a $500,000 home approximately $23 per month.
Right.
If I have
but that calculation, I'm sorry, I'm just going to jump in to make sure I'm following.
Yep.
Is that is a snapshot in time. And
Correct.
so the projected $23 is that nothing changes on those balances.
Yes, that is our snapshot in time right now.
Right. And so, but the idea that it's going to be $23 per month for the 10 years duration of the referendum is predicated on the assumption that that moment in time is static.
Correct.
Right. And so during COVID, I listened, there's a podcast that I really like. It's a guy named he's Peter Attia. He's a doctor, and he was talking. They play a game called in order for this to be true, what would have to happen? And you kind of game that out. And it was an exercise they did during COVID. this is the rapture, or this is going to be, we're going to be back in school by Easter, right? In the beginning, there were these conflicting things. So in order for that to happen, what would have to be true? So that's where I
Yes.
was kind of going with that. In order for that first scenario to happen, what would have to be true? Well, everything would have to stop, and at
Yes.
the same time, you'd have more people coming back to public school would be the way that would cause an increase from a
Yes.
more. So in order for to go using that same kind of methodology, then that number, the likelihood that number to go down, in order for that number not to go down, it would assume we're not having growth,
Right.
and or at least and a student increase that's commensurate with that growth to offset that your cost per month per household.
Yes.
Am I following that correctly?
Yep.
Am I understanding
Yep.
that right? Okay.
And what we believe and history would tell us is we may have an increase in students, but the growth and development of the tax base is going to be bigger and faster than that, and therefore everybody's portion would decrease, right?
Yeah, not everybody that's moving in has kids that are immediately going into the district. Certainly, like the Del Webb neighborhood was an asset because,
Exactly.
it's 55 and older. They tend not to
Yes.
be procreating. So,
And
so and you and
Costco,
you and you have a higher median value of home too. So,
yes. Costco moving into the district, Beckman Coulter
right, the
adding
industrial base. We didn't even gotten to
industrial
that yet.
base, commercial base, all of that helps as a tax base within the school district. So when we say it's likely to not go up, I appreciate you trying to pull apart the factors. Well, what would have to happen to make it go up? What would have to happen to make it go down? What would have to happen to make it be static? And then have people understand. And if my home is valued at more than $500,000, then my portion would be more than $23 per month. If my home is valued at less than 500,000, my portion would be less than $23 per month. And we have a tax calculator at our website so people can literally plug in their home value and see what their monthly contribution would be towards the referendum.
Yeah, and what we're going to do is, I'm in the show notes. I'm going to have all of the contact information, the email, the website, and if you'd like the direct phone number that was on the mailer that was done, so people can get that question. But I think it's just an important thing to pull apart because you'll get people that'll get really fixated on these numbers. The other thing is the growth. Your Ellers, I suspect that a good amount of the data that Ellers is using in terms of trying to do these projections is based on reports from Met Council, which are developed in conjunction with the comprehensive plans that the cities are doing. I mean, we're basically living, this is the full manifestation of the 1990 comp plans, where we are
Yeah,
today. This is
yeah,
preordained. This isn't sort of random in terms of what's happening now with respect to the annexation of the townships, the growth patterns that you're seeing in these communities. This was essentially predetermined, which frankly is why we have 212. We did,
absolutely.
I mean, we didn't have 212 so Skippy could get over to Shields faster to get soccer cleats. I mean, this was the growth corridor.
Yes.
And so these numbers aren't, I guess where I'm going is I suspect that these numbers are not too willy-nilly or pie in the sky in terms of, population projections because, we're basically living we're at the manifestation side of the 1990s comp plans.
Yeah.
And the comp
Yeah.
plans they're working on now are the 2040s, 2050s.
2040s and
So
2050s. So yes, they are part of a master plan, and they're also grounded in data directly from Carver County. So they work with Carver County and they get all the tax information from the county, and then they can break that down by school district and they can look at trends. What has been the trend growth of property values? What has been the trend growth of adding commercial, adding industrial, adding residential in our school district? And then they create a plan moving forward, and they help us estimate a point in time and be able to talk reasonably well about what we expect to happen given history, given trends, given the information and data that we have, right?
right. And I suspect the only thing that would deviate a little bit is, what broader economic things if that growth slows down. But to your point, if the growth slows down, it would be hard to imagine there'd be an influx of students all of a sudden into the district.
Correct.
So, I mean, I suspect your job would be a lot easier if you were in, I don't know, Hopkins, where there's no growth and the numbers would tend to be, I think, relatively static, unless there was some devaluation of the overall median home price or something like that.
Yeah. Um, a landlocked, I call them landlocked school districts where they're pretty much fully developed,
Hmm.
often face the challenges of declining student enrollment and having to consider closing schools because unless those families that moved in, when they were growing, families moved in, they had children. But if they age in place and don't regentrify and turn over to new families with young children, what happens is that school district will grow, they'll build buildings to meet the needs of the students. And then when the families age in place, there aren't as many students, the enrollment goes down, and then they're left with a really hard challenge of trying to figure out what to do with the facilities that they might no longer need anymore. So we're only about 50% developed as a school district. There's a lot of farmland. So even if people now age in place in Chaska or Chanhassen and the more developed parts of our school district, as long as we continue to grow out into Carver and to the west and Victoria,
Victoria, yeah.
that might just balance itself out and we don't have really aggressive growth because the new is just replacing the students who graduate with parents who are aging in place and not bringing new students into those older areas in our community, right?
Yeah.
So that's all fascinating. Enrollment projections, births, who stays, who doesn't, how fast do properties turn over. And we do that work internally as well to try to project out for multiple years so that we can get ahead of, do we need to do a building? Do we need to consider boundaries and reorganize the way students go to school to make the best use of the space that we have?
Yeah, that redistricting, I remember when that was happening and the growth was kind of uneven. And I had friends who were on the school board at that time and they were getting calls and, it's always tricky. Nobody really likes change. Then they think that this is where little Susie's going to go to grade school till she moves to middle school and then the boundaries change. I know that's a challenge. One of the things I think the district did especially well was during the recession when the growth kind of cooled there for a few years was
Yeah.
kind of repurposing the high school. I think you had daycare in there for a while, you know, in
Yeah,
some
when
of
I
those
was at
buildings
Ch
to try to balance that out to keep,
when I was at Chaska, we had the early childhood center in the greenhouse. So trying to make better or as efficient as we can uses of the spaces that we've got. That's why the freshman center became a third middle school when we added Chanhassen High School and we brought ninth graders into the high schools. That was one of our solutions as we were growing really rapidly in the 2005 to 2015 range. There was so much fast growth and so many students coming that we needed additional buildings to accommodate that.
Sure, sure. Well, we covered a lot of ground. This was fun. The time has just flown. And I want to be respectful of your time, David. So as we kind of wrap up, what's the big takeaway? What would you really, we used to do this question, we called it the beer question. And it was like, if you were sitting in someone's living room and you had a beer, like what's the one thing you really want them to get?
Yep. Thanks for asking. I think my it's hard for me to wrap it into one takeaway, but here are my takeaways. I think in Eastern Carver County Schools, we made a commitment to creating exceptional experiences and opportunities for kids. And we did that by creating a two high school system and looking for ways to be smaller and create opportunities. I think part of that is there's a cost that is associated with that. And and the state of Minnesota struggles with its tax issues and its own budget to fund education the way any of us might want. We might all want lower class sizes and we might want more opportunities for our kids, and we know it comes at a cost. So the state says, here's the dollars that we can appropriate to education. And if your local community wants to do more than that to pursue excellence, then your local community needs to step in to be able to support that. And then the last piece that I have is I know that as a taxpayer in Eastern Carver County Schools in the county of Carver, I look at my tax statement and I can feel a little bit exhausted sometimes with the amount of taxes that are being added on. All I would ask people to consider is because school districts have to go out to ask for the community to support that. And we can feel frustrated with the state of Minnesota, or maybe I'm frustrated with a city, or maybe I'm frustrated with a county. Um, just don't take that out on the school district would be my ask. Really think about where is your frustration coming from? And if you support schools and the work we're trying to do with kids and trying to create opportunities, and we don't want those opportunities to go away, we'd ask that you support the referendum for the school district and not take it out on us because we're the one thing you can vote on. And it feels a little bit frustrating when taxes are going up and some things feel out of control. And if there are any questions about that and how we use the dollars or why we're asking for the dollars or something doesn't make sense, we're open to having those conversations and trying to answer those questions.
All right. And then did you want to put in a plug for the there's a public forum coming up, I think.
Public forum already occurred last week.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So we have been credit to our superintendent, Dr. Athke, out trying to be in civic organizations, Rotary clubs, out in PTOs, out at the lodge in Chaska, meeting with all of the city councils, having open forums, trying to be available to make people aware, share information so that they can make an informed decision when it is time to vote on November 4th or through early voting and polling.
All right. Terrific. Well, David, thank you. It's been a pleasure. You were a wealth of knowledge, and I think this it went really fast. So so I know it was a lot of good information. Sometimes I sit and I'm like, okay, now what? And this was not that. You were just terrific. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Greg. Appreciate it.
All right, I'm going to stop recording right now.